UFC 275. Draftkings has released the salary so we can take our first look. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. Welcome, we are back to the normal schedule, so you can expect this video today and then the final picks video later in the week. Last week we had a pretty solid week. Of course the cash game lineup hit for us because that's what we do here. Only 2 underdogs on the entire 14 fight card won, and it was Karolina Kowalkiewicz picking up her first finish ever in the UFC, which is crazy. And then Lucas Almeida came through for the gang, so we can't be too mad at the result when you're in your tournaments trying to make something happen. The mid-range is where we had to live last week. I think this week might be a little bit different. I'm excited to get into this for you. And as always with the first look, we start at the top of the slate. We work our way down. The top of the slate has $9,600 Valentina Shevchenko this week. She's our co-main event favorite. She's going to be defending her belt against Taila Santos in this matchup. Obviously, she's going to be the most expensive fighter on the slate, and it's because she's always the biggest favorite. She has the highest scoring ceiling on the entire card. She's the most complete fighter on the roster regardless of division as well, and I don't think you can argue that. No other fighter on the roster is going to be coming in at -800, -1000, -1200 odds with regularity the way that she does. And at 125 pounds, she looks unbeatable, and I don't think Taila Santos is going to change that. Santos has looked good in the UFC, yes, but Shevchenko is on another level. Santos on paper looks like a destroyer, but almost all of her finishes have come from competition outside the UFC with records like 0-0, 0-1, 1-3, very low-level fighters. In the UFC, she's only recorded 1 finish, and that was a submission against Joanna, who we know is a poor grappler. So I don't see anywhere where she has an advantage in this fight. When you take into account striking, grappling, experience, cardio, fight IQ, when you take into account all these things, Shevchenko is superior everywhere. Now I know that's not groundbreaking information, but I say that to set this up. I think you need to roster Valentina Shevchenko this week. Oftentimes we look at the most expensive fighter on the slate, and sometimes it's hard to get there. Like last week we had Aaron Blanchfield, Damon Jackson. None of them showed up on the winning lineup. Now if you were playing smaller field stuff, they might have showed up on the winning lineup in your contest, but in terms of the best possible combination of fighters, they didn't get there just because they were really expensive, and from a fantasy perspective, they were outscored and outperformed by fighters that were priced lower than they were. Couple that with only 2 underdogs winning, you're looking at a situation where a fighter at a high price tag isn't going to get there for you. But this is a completely different situation because we have Valentina Shevchenko, who's going to have 5 rounds to work against Taila Santos, who's taking a massive step up in competition. We have to get here on DraftKings. I expect a decision win or a late finish for the champion here. Her scoring ceiling is so high compared to the people that are priced around her that you need to play her not only in your tournaments, but in your cash games as well. So the pick for me in this fight is Valentina Shevchenko to win and to score over 110 DraftKings points, and still. Next at 9,200 we have Manel Kape. He's in an interesting fight this week against Rogerio Bontorin. Manel Kape looks like he's finding his footing in the UFC. He was dealt a pretty tough hand to start with against Pantoja in his UFC debut, followed that up with Matthews Nicolau, but since then he's looked pretty damn good. He has all the tools to win this fight, but I do think that it's going to be competitive. On the other side, Bontorin is no slouch. He recently had a really close fight with Brandon Royval, and he could be a handful when this fight hits the mat. He's got a wild style to him, and I think that can create some challenges for Manel Kape. My issue with Bontorin is that he's not the most dangerous guy, so I don't see him having big moments against Manel Kape, who is a tank for this weight class. And if he's not having big moments here and there, I think he's going to struggle to steal these rounds from Manel Kape. So I do see Manel Kape winning, but I don't see him scoring a 3rd straight first round knockout, and that's going to keep me off of him for DraftKings this week. Because if we dissect what happened with Ode Osborne, you're looking at a situation where he was losing the first round, lands a flying knee out of nowhere that sends Ode to space, but there was 16 seconds left in the round. If that knee doesn't land, then he doesn't score anywhere near the 108 points that he had that night. And in his most recent win against Zolga Zumagulov, he did very well. He had 2 knockdowns and a first round finish, but at the same time, there was less than a minute left in that round. If Zolga Zumagulov survives that round, we might see a situation where he doesn't come anywhere close to the 131 points that he had on that night. So when you're looking at a situation of playing somebody like Manel Kape versus paying up for Valentina Shevchenko, think about this. If Manel Kape doesn't score a first round round finish, does he score as many points as Valentina? Probably not. And we could use this to our advantage by avoiding him this week. I think the recency bias is going to get a lot of people to play Manel Kape this week, hoping for that first round finishing upside, but he's pretty low output normally. Rogerio Bontorin is not the kind of guy that's going to be put away easily. Manel Kape could very well score you 75 points in a decision win, and I actually think that's the most likely outcome here. So the pick for me is Manel Kape by decision, but from a DraftKings perspective, I don't know if I'm going to pay 9,200 for him. Next at 9,100, we have Seung-Woo Choi. He's going to be fighting Josh Culiabo this week. These guys should go to war because they aren't the highest level talents in the UFC at this weight class, but they both fight hard, and this fight should play out on the feet primarily. For DraftKings, kind of like Manel Kape, I'm not sold on Seung-Woo Choi going in there and picking up a first round knockout, so I don't know if I'll be on him either. And I say that because while Josh Culiabo isn't great, he is tough, and that toughness will keep him in this fight, and that's why I expect this to go the distance. But what I do like about Choi is his length and his sharp punches down the middle, and I think those will result in bigger moments for him to steal rounds, and that's how he ends up winning this fight. And he's coming in with a pretty high knockdown rate, but even with a knockdown, I have a hard time seeing him getting over 100 DraftKings points this week, and I think there's better options on this card when it comes to finishing upside, or at least the grappling upside to be able to get these high scores that you'll need to win your contests. I don't want to target this fight necessarily, but the pick for me is Seung-Woo Choi by decision. Next at 9,000, we have Brendan Allen. He's going to be fighting Jacob Malkoun this week, and this is a tough fight for Brendan Allen. Allen is going to be the taller, longer fighter in this matchup. He's probably the better striker as well, and he's a competent grappler on the ground. He's gotten some submissions over the last few years, and he's leaned on his grappling to win some of these fights, but I wouldn't say he's an elite grappler. He's not elite on the ground by any stretch, and that's where I think he'll have issues, because I think he'll have to be to win this fight, because Jacob Malkoun is going to fight with a ton of pressure. He's constantly looking to get this fight to the ground. We saw Malkoun put up 2 slate-breaking performances in his last 2 fights. If we pull it up here, you'll see he dominated in his last 2 fights with 8 takedowns against Abdul Razak Al Hassan, 6 takedowns against Dobson, who was making his debut, and I think we could see more of the same here. Now, obviously, Brendan Allen is a much better grappler than both of these men, but at the same time, Malkoun understands leverage so well, and he's great against the cage, and he trains with Robert Whittaker. So at this weight class, I don't think you can ask for a better training partner, and I think if you're sitting there drilling day in and day out, getting somebody to the ground, I think you'll have a much harder time getting Robert Whittaker down than you would somebody like Brendan Allen. And it's important not to let the price tag fool you this week. Brendan Allen always gets respect from the odds makers, so it's no surprise to me that he's coming in as a sizable favorite, but Malkoun's style is tough for anybody to deal with at this weight class, especially somebody like Brendan Allen, who respectfully is a middle-of-the-pack fighter for this division. So here early in the week, the pick for me is Jacob Malkoun by decision with rinse and repeat takedowns, making him a strong DraftKings play this week. Next at 8,900, we have Jiri Prochazka, one half of our main event. Before I get into this, if you don't mind, take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and comment something for the algorithm. You know how the algorithm works. You comment, it helps. I appreciate it. Now, Jiri Prochazka is going to be fighting Glover Teixeira this week, challenging for the lightweight strap. Jiri might end up being one of the scariest knockout artists the division has ever seen when it's all said and done. He's got 28 wins as a pro, 25 of them have come by way of knockout. I think he has 2 submissions as well. The dude is a monster, and he's a finisher. He folded Volkan Oezdemir like some laundry in his UFC debut, and he dismantled Dominic Reyes over the course of 2 rounds, scoring the knockout of the year that year with that spinning elbow. Now at 29 years old, right in his fighting prime, he's taking on a 42-year-old Glover Teixeira who's been chin-checked before and won't offer Prochazka very much on the feet. Now, Glover has been getting it done on the ground, where he's going to have a huge advantage in this spot, but here's the problem. The classic saying, every round starts on the feet, is actually important here. Every second these guys are standing and trading, it's dangerous for Glover Teixeira, and the fight could be over like that. And while Glover is recently submitting most of his opponents, he typically isn't doing it inside the first round. He's breaking guys down over time, but I don't expect him to be able to do that against a fighter as athletic, powerful, and dangerous as Jiri Prochazka. I expect a first or second round knockout for Jiri in this spot, and a very short title reign for the legend that is Glover Teixeira, who, by the way, has nothing really left to fight for. He has records in the division, he has more than enough money, I'm assuming, to not have to fight. He achieved the ultimate goal of finally realizing the title. He may even retire after this fight is over if it doesn't go his way. He may retire after this fight is over if it does go his way. I could totally see him winning the fight, getting the belt wrapped around him, and he takes off his gloves and does that whole thing. And while we're on the topic of gloves, I got these signed gloves right here, signed by an MMA legend. If you're looking at the signature and trying to guess who it is, I'll just let you know the guy's undefeated in MMA. And I'm trying to think of the best way to make it fair for everybody to have a shot at one of these gloves. So if you have an idea, maybe it's a wheel spin or some kind of drawing that I do, leave it in the comments, let me know, and we'll run this soon and we'll get these out of here, and hopefully this could be yours. And maybe I'll sign some more later if you want, I don't know. But my pick for this fight is Jiri Prochazka by knockout. He's going to carry heavy ownership on DraftKings, but it's for good reason. I don't think Glover's going to be able to stand across from this guy for any longer than 7.5 minutes. Next at 8,800, we have Zhang Weili. She's going to be fighting Joanna Jedrzejczyk this week in the rematch of the best MMA fight of all time. If you disagree, you can tell me in the comments what you think is the best fight ever, so I can tell you that you're wrong, because it was this one. And this rematch, it's almost a coin flip in my eyes, because I think both of these women have the tools to win. Joanna is probably a bit faster. She's definitely the sharper of the two, while Weili is more powerful, plus she can mix in the wrestling if she wants to. The first fight was close and Joanna was scoring more, but the damage was the big difference maker there, and I think that's going to be the reason why Weili wins this weekend as well. I give her the slight edge because I think that the numbers will be close, but the bigger moments will belong to Weili. She may even score a takedown or two, and I think Joanna lacks the power to do any serious damage in this fight. For DraftKings, I could tell you right now, this is going to go way over owned. I'm not going to play either side of this matchup. This fight is most likely going to play out on the feet. They've only got 15 minutes to work. This isn't a 5-round fight like the first time around, and I seriously doubt that if Weili wins, she breaks 80 points. Even in their first fight where they went to war, she landed nearly 200 strikes, had 5 rounds to work with, got a takedown, got some control time, and still only scored 104 DraftKings points. I'm hoping that the name value of this fight is going to cause a lot of people to roster it either way, and it's going to burn a lot of the field and leave us who faded this fight in a good spot. And I say roster this fight because even if Joanna wins, she normally isn't looking for takedowns. I think that even if she wanted to, she'd struggle to get Weili down, so her ceiling in this 3-round fight is extremely limited for DraftKings, so I recommend staying away from this one. The pick for me for this fight, however, is Zhang Weili by decision. Next at 8,700, we have Jocelyn Edwards. She's going to be fighting Romana Pascual this week, and like we talked about with Mike Trizano a week ago, there ain't no way I'm playing Jocelyn Edwards at 8,700. No chance at all. This price tag is atrocious for a one-dimensional striker who lacks serious power, and I don't really see how she wins this fight despite being the favorite. And to go a step further from a DraftKings perspective, I think Romana Pascual can end up scoring a decent amount of points in her own right. We know from Pascual's last fight against Josie Nunes that she's super durable, she has good cardio, and she can turn to her wrestling when she wants to. Jocelyn Edwards has been taken down in every one of her UFC fights, and in her last 2 fights, she was taken down a total of 9 times and controlled for nearly 23 minutes. Romana Pascual is limited on the feet, so she may look to wrestle even more in this matchup, which makes her an interesting DraftKings play, especially when it comes to cash games. And we've absolutely crushed cash games recently. The people on Twitter know what I'm talking about. Nearly a month straight of profit. It's a very simple system we've come up with. I'll show you a message that I got from one of you the other day. Out of respect for privacy, I'll leave their profile picture and their name out, but if they want to tell you who they are in the comments, by all means. But here's just a screenshot that we got the other day, and if we go down, he talks a little bit about how the bankroll management plus the cash games has really helped him grow his bankroll. And most importantly, it's helped him avoid depositing money every week, which is the goal. I mean, if you're constantly depositing money each and every week into your DraftKings accounts to play, then you are doing something wrong. And some of you may look at these numbers and think, well, I play tournaments and I want to win the big prizes. And that's cool, brother, but I assure you this guy is enjoying his Saturdays a lot more than you are if you find yourself depositing money each and every week. But going back to this fight, just like Mike Trizano last week, you have a fighter that's priced up, way too expensive. You know that they're not going to pay off their salary even if they do win, so there is value on the other side. If you're targeting this fight, you might as well take the underdog in Romana Pascual. So the pick for this fight is Romana Pascual by decision. She probably scores you around 80 to to 90 DraftKings points. Next at 8,600, we have Silvana Gomez-Juarez. She's fighting Liang this week. This fight is actually very sneaky when it comes to DraftKings because there's finishing upside on each side, and it's going to go way under-owned, probably the lowest owned fight of the night outside of maybe the one we just talked about. And I know it's rare for me to say that there's finishing upside in a fight like this because with women's MMA, we almost always take the over. It's a bet that hits 76% of the time or more, but this is not one of those cases where I would take the over. In 14 fights, Gomez-Juarez has gone the distance only 3 times. On the other side, for Liang, in 24 fights, she's only gone the distance 3 times. Gomez-Juarez is riding a 2-fight losing streak with 2 armbar finishes back-to-back. Most of Liang's wins come by way of armbar. The stars are aligning here. The MMA gods are giving us the keys. We just need to drive the car. Liang was signed to the UFC, and she drew a very tough Ariane Carnelozzi in her UFC debut, where she took her down 3 out of 4 times, almost finished her in the first round. She got finished in the second, but she proved that she can hang at this level. Silvana Gomez-Juarez was not originally signed to the UFC. She was supposed to fight on Contender Series. However, the weekend before, Lupita Godinez lost her opponent, so they decided to call up Gomez-Juarez so that they could save the Lupi fight, and that's why she's in the UFC now. So she wasn't signed straight away. She saved that fight. No one expected her to beat Lupi Godinez, and then she comes back and loses to Vanessa Demopoulos by first round armbar. She's 0-2 in the UFC. And to go a step further, if she lost her fight on Contender Series, none of us would know who she is. So now at 37 years old, with 2 straight first round losses to the same technique, she's going up against a 25-year-old prospect who's looking to get this fight to the ground. That, to me, sounds like a recipe for disaster. Now, at the same time, Gomez-Juarez does have pop on her shots. She could find a knockout in the spot, but I think that's a lot less likely than her losing this fight by way of submission. So again, the likelihood of this fight finishing is actually pretty high. This is a striker versus grappler matchup, so I'm leaning toward the grappler here. The pick for me is Liang by submission. Next at 8,500, we have Andre Fialho. He is going to be fighting Jake Matthews this week, and it's hard to not like Fialho in this spot. We've seen his punching power on full display in his last 2 fights, and this is exactly what the UFC signed up for when they added this guy to the roster. A finisher with power in both hands who isn't afraid to take one to give one. He's already fought 3 times this year, and it's only June, so you know that the promotion loves him. He made his UFC debut against Michel Pereira, where he lost a competitive fight as an underdog, no shame in that. He smoked Miguel Baeza, who's now 3-3 after 3 straight losses, and he spun Cameron Van Kamp's jaw, who was stepping in on short notice, up a weight class, making his UFC debut. So while it's been awesome, I say that to say this, it's hard to tell how good Andre Fialho is. But on the other side, I feel similarly about Jake Matthews, who has good experience because he's been in the UFC since 2014, but he's easily had the softest matchmaking of all time when it comes to being a prospect in the UFC. He's been in the promotion for 8 years, he's fought 15 times, and only 2 of his opponents are still in the promotion. Now, I could see him having some success in this fight if he can effectively use his wrestling, but on the feet, I think the power advantage on the side of Fialho can cause some serious issues. And as much as I would like to avoid the chalk here that is Andre Fialho and take the more experienced guy with the deeper grappling bag, I think I like Andre Fialho more in this matchup. Plus, from a DraftKings perspective, Matthews historically does not put up slate-winning numbers. Meanwhile, Fialho has done that in his last 2 fights. So the pick for me is Andre Fialho by knockout with over 100 DraftKings points scored. Next at 8,400, we have Steve Garcia. He's going to be fighting Maheshate this week, who's making his UFC debut. Steve Garcia is coming off a knockout win over Charlie Otaveros, who's got the chin of a Bob's Burgers character, just non-existent. And in his fight before that, in his UFC debut, he was controlled by Luis Pena for over 14 minutes of a 15-minute fight. So he's seen some really high highs and some really low lows already. And for that reason, it's not easy to get a read on this guy, but I do side with him in this matchup. Maheshate, outside of his fight on the Contender Series, has fought as low-level competition as possible, which is important because I think once this fight starts heating up, they both start landing, I think that's when Maheshate is going to crumble under the pressure and ultimately get finished. Some of the shots that put guys out on the regional scene in China are going to be no problem for Steve Garcia, who is tough as hell and is going to be throwing with more power than Maheshate has ever felt before. Plus, Maheshate is only 22 years old, so he still has a lot to learn. His body's still developing. He could prove me wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's not in the UFC for all that long. Steve Garcia is 30. He's got grown man strength, and this is a spot where he can look really good potentially. And at this price, a knockdown plus a finish could really put him in a good spot, so he's worth a roster spot in my opinion. And on DraftKings, I do actually expect him to be the lower owned fighter in this matchup. I think he flies under the radar in terms of ownership on this whole slate, and he might surprise a lot of people. So the pick for me for this fight is Steve Garcia by knockout. Next at 8,300, we have Danaa Batgerel. He's fighting Mr. Perfect Kang this week. Danaa burned us last time out. He got spinning back fisted, and that was by Chris Gutierrez, and now it's a pretty quick turnaround for him in what I would consider a pretty tough matchup. We know that Danaa Batgerel has big power in his hands, some of the biggest in the division on paper, but his knockouts have come over guys like Old Man Guido Canetti, Kevin Natividad, who's 0-2 in the UFC after being knocked out twice, and most recently against Brandon Davis, who's been cut and re-signed by the UFC with a complete UFC record of 3-6. So yes, he has power, but we saw that in his last fight, he's a little limited because he swings wildly, and if he's not hitting the mark, he doesn't look good. Falling in love with that kind of punching power can leave him exposed to getting countered on the feet or counter wrestled like he did in his UFC debut against Alatong Hae. On the other side, you have Kang, who isn't coming off a bad knockout loss. He's going to have advantages in height and reach. He's getting takedowns in almost all of his UFC fights, and he's only been knocked out once in his entire career, and that was by a soccer kick back when George W. Bush was in office. So the way I see it, Kang has more ways to win when you consider the grappling, while Danaa Batgerel is a one-dimensional power striker. And I know we picked Jiri Prochazka earlier in the video, but in most striker versus grappler matchups, we're looking to go with the grappler, and that's where my head is at in this spot. So the pick for me is Kang by decision, but don't be surprised if he finds a submission here instead. Most of his wins are by way of submission, and if he's winning this fight, it's because he's gotten it to the ground, so I think that he's live for a finish on the ground as well, but I think the most likely outcome is Kang by decision, scoring a decent amount of points on the basis of his grappling. In our last matchup here is Della Maddalena coming in at 8,200. He's fighting Ramazan Emeev this week. We have another striker versus grappler matchup here. Della Maddalena is a crisp striker with good power in each of his hands. He's super accurate and he's smart with his boxing, but I do worry about his ability to stop takedowns here. Ramazan Emeev has been such a safe bet in the UFC outside of his last fight where he was absolutely robbed against Danny Roberts. Pretty bad scorecards that night, like as bad as Jeff Molina versus Zolga Zumagulov last week. But for Emeev, he has had a lot of success in the UFC, normally securing multiple takedowns, several minutes of control time, and just doing a good job of controlling the fight. His fighting style isn't exciting at all, but it is very effective. What's a little scary is he's getting up there in age at 35 years old versus 25 years old for Della Maddalena, so I worry a little bit about his gas tank. And in Emeev's last fight against Danny Roberts, he didn't look good in the third round. That was easily his worst round. So clearly it's a tough call to make either way, but it's even tougher because Emeev's not the type to get knocked out. And while Della Maddalena looked good in the third round against Angelusa, he was controlling the pace and they were mostly striking. So I'm interested to see how his gas tank responds to having to work back up to his feet and defend takedowns in those first two rounds. So it begs the question, will he be fresh enough in the third round to find the finish if Emeev goes up 0-2 in the first? I don't really know. So for me, I'm going to go with the experience. I'm going to go with what we know. I'm going to pick Ramazan Emeev to win this fight by decision. So now I'm going to go over the slate at 8,000 and below. Just quick review of those. We are going to build lineups later in the week with the final picks video, so make sure you catch that. And based on what you've heard so far, let me know if there's anything that you think I'm missing. Let me know if you think I'm wrong about any of these spots. I know some of you out there really like Glover Teixeira this week. I could see why, but I'd love to hear your take on some of these, so please let me know. As for this slate at 8,000 and below, again, you know how I feel about Ramazan Emeev. I think he's in for a very tough fight, a very close fight, but I do think that he can win. I much prefer the Kang side of this matchup. I know that the knockout threat is always there for Danaa Batgerel, but Kang is not the kind of guy to get knocked out all that easily. Maheshate is just too young, too green, too raw for me to like him in this matchup against somebody as gritty as Steven Garcia. Jake Matthews, now I've heard arguments so far this week for Jake Matthews that if he's able to get the wrestling going, then Fialho's in a bad spot, but I just don't think that he's going to respond to the power all that well. Like when Fialho starts to get that lead hook going, I think that it's going to give him serious trouble. Na Liang, and has it here as Liang Na, I think that she is going to be a serious problem for Silvana Gomez Juarez, come in at very, very low ownership and possibly find a submission of her own. I'm excited to put her in my lineups this week when I see that 5% ownership next to her name like Carolina last week. Romana Pascual, I don't think her ceiling is all that high, but when you look at Jocelyn Edwards, she did give up over 100 points to Carol Hoza in 3 rounds. She gave up nearly 90 points to Jessica Rose Clark in 3 rounds. I think that Romana Pascual, if she does get her grappling going, could find herself in top position and just live there. Joanna against Weili, as a fan, I would love to see Joanna win this fight. I would love to see Joanna champion once again if she got this fight and then got to go against Carla Esparza and barbecue her and get her title back. I think that would be awesome. But again, from a DraftKings perspective, I don't think that Joanna in 3 rounds is going to be able to do very much. She might score 63 points, and that's not something that you're going to want in your lineup, especially if you're playing tournaments. Glover Teixeira, old man Glover, I feel like look at his eyes. I feel like he's coming for me. He has been on a crazy run recently. He's fought big power punchers, but I don't think he's fought guys that have the same kind of attack that Jiri Prochazka has. Like the combination of speed, power, and awkwardness is something that he's never seen before. I think he's seen speed and power like Jiri's when he fought Rumble Johnson, but we all know how that went. Jacob Malkoun, I feel like this is going to be the one that people talk about in the comments. He's not going to win. He's not going to win. Based on this picture, he looks like he could be my brother a little bit. So I think my brother Jacob Malkoun is going to get it done this week. Because let's not forget, despite these guys not being great grapplers, Al Hassan, I don't even want to entertain this. We saw Joaquin Buckley take him down time and time again. But AJ Dobson did a good job of defending takedowns early. I think that he would do a better job of staying on his feet than Brendan Allen would. Brendan Allen's the type to burn people when he's at a high price. We saw that against Chris Curtis. So don't be surprised if Jacob Malkoun gets it done here at 7,200. And then the rest of the lot, Culiabo, Bontorin, Santos, I'm not really interested. I think of these 3 down here, the highest chance of winning is going to come from Bontorin, just maybe winning rounds based on volume, because again, sometimes Manel does like to take his time, and taking your time could lose you rounds, could lose you minutes. But I do think that he probably loses just like the other 2. I think he has the best chance of winning out of the 3, but again, he probably loses. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. That way I could bring more of this to you.